Okay, everybody, this is a sort of a what I'm calling a bit of a give back talk. For about 2 years now, Ian Telligo's been doing sort of IPv6 audits or reports for customers, which has mostly been service providers, but it's also been enterprises. There's been a lot of work involved in this. We're one of the only people doing it, and I really wish there were a lot of other people doing it, and I'm more than happy to train competitors to do it. It's actually easy getting the work. Post getting the work, it's a bit harder communicating and getting the work done. I'll give you some statistics on that towards the end about how many reports, how struggling some of them are, and so on. But communication in some of the countries, so I'll be delivering this talk at APNIC as well, hopefully, and also trying to get some locals, because we've been dealing with a lot of different countries like in Singapore, Malaysia, and some of the different countries around the region, and it's easier if you've got local people doing it as opposed to trying to work with people that work very differently. So what this really is how best to prepare your customer or yourself. So this can also be used by corporates internally and so forth. We've been doing it over about 2 years. I want to give you some insights to prepare yourself or your customers for IPv6. It's information to help you to develop your own reporting offerings. They don't have to look like this, but this gives you a good, this is a lot of experience and where a lot of things gone wrong and a lot of things gone well. What doesn't work. And sometimes that's culturally contextual as well. Also, it's a help to develop what you expect from the report, what goes well, what doesn't, wrong assumptions, and some advice at the end. So at the moment, we primarily do networking infrastructure audits and reports. But we've also been working with a few integrators. I presume you have the same concept here. People that look after a lot of other customers' networks. And we've helped them develop their server infrastructures. We've also been using that ourselves for our hosting customers. People have got thousands of servers across hundreds of racks and things like that. Application and service infrastructure reports. We'll get onto what those are, and the Office data center supporting infrastructure. Other reports, specific in-depth technology reports such as analysis of a particular hosting platform, hosted exchange. That's been a problematic one with IPv6. So one of the interfaces that's provided by Microsoft still only runs on 2003 and things like that. So there has been a few very targeted reports around a particular platform to try and figure out how to make it v6 or when and how it's coming. So generally the reports are broken up into 3 phases. The actual audit itself and resulting report, which is doing the inventory, developing the scope based on the current functionality, deduplicating the network. So it doesn't matter if you've got 5 or 5,000, 7200 MPE 400s if they've got all the same iOS version. It doesn't matter. So we've got customers that have got racks and racks of AS 5400s and 5400s, I think. And it doesn't matter that they're all the same. It actually can keep the report. You might have a massive network in some ways and 3 key platforms. So and then we've got smaller networks, baby ISPs, that looks like they've gone shopping at Kmart or something for every and decided to use a different vendor for each bit of equipment they purchased. And that happens often. Then research, once you've deduplicated all the actual hardware and everything you've got, then you have to research them all. Now that's one of the struggling areas where you've got to communicate with a lot of different vendors. The key vendors are generally easy to deal with, except if you're dealing with their legacy hardware. Cisco is pretty good, got a lot of information. Some of the old shapers and things like that, they're not so much fun trying to figure out what the capabilities are. Or whether, not just the capabilities, because sometimes that's quite easy of it doesn't do it. Moving forward of their roadmap of when it will do it. Can it do it with the actual firmware, the TCAM sizes? Is it just like a lot of the CPEs today? Is this hardware just dead? It's not going to go past it. It can't hold it. IPv6 routes or what it's going to need to be able to do. So is it, do you just declare that one need to be replaced? What else have we got here? So, and also in a lot of the enterprise grade hardware and service provider hardware, you've also got to go down into the actual hardware modules and the different options that are inside them as well. Then you've got to prepare the report. Now, this phase one is where about 80, I think it's about 80% of our business sits. Not everyone gets onto phase two. A lot of people get quite disheartened. I've actually had people almost on the verge of tears. Little ISPs in Australia that sit there and go, okay, so I've got 3620s as my core, and I've got my 2912s and all these things, and they talk about their dial-up users and their 350 DSL users, and you just sit there thinking to yourself, oh God. And then you just tell the guy, so have you got any money? And this is a big problem, and there's probably a few of those people in the room here where you've put 10 years in, and it's your child, your ISP that you've been building over a long period of time and serving your small customer base. And when you've got to tell him he's got to buy his entire equipment again, that can be quite impacting. So we've actually had a number of those where people have, you've gone through all the briefing and just even the scoping and doing the inventory. This guy, I only got to the inventory and started to get a list of the equipment, and that was the end of him. It didn't go any further than that. Just for your information, generally we charge based on unique equipment with a modifier based on the number of vendors, because if you're communicating with one vendor, if it's an entire Cisco network, it's actually a lot easier than, with 100 bits of equipment with Cisco is easier than 10 bits of equipment with 10 different vendors. It's a lot harder to talk to someone, especially for just such a small item as well. So then you give them the report with the recommendations, and the next stage is often full of negotiations about them trying to negotiate with what needs to be done, which we find amusing since we've just told them what they need to be done. It's not like this is a choice. And then the implementation of the results, which is analysing the reports, deciding on what functionality they want to achieve, and then commissioning the project of purchasing the upgrades, hardware, licensing, and actually rolling them out. That can take a while. I've got some details about that. We've got people that a year later still haven't implemented the recommendations. Now, they've agreed to implement them, but when you're rebooting core routers and core switches and you want to take your 3560s and 3750s and you have to reboot them with different profiles and all that sort of stuff, and they've got 60 of them, then it takes a lot of time. So once all the everything's upgraded, then implementing IPv6. Now, most of these phases are pretty applicable, whether it's infrastructure, servers, or something else. So phase 3 is where you can develop your plan, policies relating to DHCP, security, and a whole bunch of different things like that. That's about it. So we'll briefly look at the reports. The most important thing that we've got here, because you can go and grab the slides, is more about the advice of what works, doesn't work, and everything else like that, and what the expectations are. So what we focus on the networking infrastructure is the routing and switching, which in an ISP is most things. The firewalls, IDS, IPS, the AAA, the transits and upstream, so we often have to negotiate, especially in Asia. I've been doing a few of these in Cambodia, dealing with the carriers, and they buy their transit from Thailand and a few different other countries, Vietnam. Some of them actually route fibre via Vietnam and buy transit straight out of Hong Kong. So you've got to try and deal, this is one of the struggles that we have, is dealing with all the individual countries, language barriers, trying to explain, not only get them to admit that they're going to do IPv6, that's a hard part in itself, but then trying to get them to stick to some timelines of when, and in a polite way, wrap that around some threats, such as if you don't do it in this time frame, we will buy it elsewhere if you have a choice. Sometimes in some of the countries you don't, especially in some of the locked countries where the government controls the main transit in and out of the country. We've had a few customers actually change transit providers in the hundreds of megs and everything else like that, but for the most part, relationships are really important in Asia, and sometimes the relationship will override their need to go V6, which is a problem. So server networking is a new thing that we've been getting into. We're sort of network specialists, but now we're playing in the Blade modules and things like that. HP and Cisco dragging us all together. That server and switching and storage is all the same thing in just one little big box and rack and everything. So we've also been playing with virtualized switching. The Nexus 1000 software for VMware, and also Arista has released the VEOS for VMware plugins. There are some virtualized security as well, so all of these need to deal with v6. Cisco is still a lot of the hardware out there, the early ASAs, and we're dealing with version 7s and 8s, and all that has to be told, you've got to upgrade, and some of them they don't have the RAM, and then that's a problem in small developing countries as well, is getting them to actually pull out the hardware, because there's much more downtime to just reboot for some new settings or firmware. Server storage networking, we've also been playing in that area, which is mainly covered in the server infrastructure. Appliances, a lot of people use a lot of strange appliances, especially in Asia and in countries that we're not that familiar with China, in Huawei and a lot of the equipment that they've got over there. There is equipment that we've seen that the logo is not even in English. Nothing's in English. Trying to even figure out what model it is has been a struggle. In New Zealand, that should be probably a lot easier. Shapers have been a particular challenge. A lot of those have been around for a very long time, and they're just not going to support v6. The routing protocols that people are using, OSPF, BGP, RIP, you've got to go through all of them. Different load balancing technologies, HSRP or VRRP, or the different things. Whether you're using VPNs, international VPNs and tunnels, everything's got to be looked at. So that's mostly what we do here, and that's it's a certain order that your network really has to be v6 before they can look at much else, or before they can implement much else. You can look at everything at the same time, and so the server infrastructure report, it's easy to just assume that, okay, if the network's v6, we can move forward. So in the server infrastructure, there's a lot older hardware out there. We're coming across old DL, whatever they are, with Pentium 3s in them that they're still going and everything else like that, with 18.2 gig disks and so forth, and have to deal with the out-of-band management on the servers and your networking, your ILOs, your DRACs on your Dells, and all the different other ones. NAS, SANs, iSCSI, fibre channel over Ethernet, thankfully, is mostly compliant if you've got switches based around that, or if you're using like the Nexus 5000s that are specifically designed for that sort of purpose. Operating systems. Everything 2008-7 Vista is pretty okay. XP can participate. 2003 is a little difficult with the static settings that it has. One of the problems we've got is we work a lot with Micros Fidelio, who does a lot of the embedded PC terminals. A lot of those are running very old and customized versions of XP and so forth. And even the modern embedded versions have been stripped down in some aspects. So the virtualization technologies, VMware Zen, the Hyper-Vs, the kernels, the VDIs that people are starting to use, and it's amazing how much technology people are starting to roll out that still doesn't do v6. Citrix, which is pretty old school, depending on what versions you're running, internal services. So after the network, the server infrastructure, before you can't worry about your web servers and your mail and DNS and anything else until you've done it in this order. Unless you want to start playing with tunneling to avoid the network salute problems, and then but pretty much on the servers you've got to support some things. You can do, I think, with what's the Teredo tunneling and all those different things, but it's just easier to have it naturally running. So the server infrastructure report, we do far less of those. We've been lucky that a lot of our customers in Australia specifically have quite modern hardware. Not much past G3, the Generation 3 HP series in a lot of the platforms, so that's been quite easy, quite good. And most of the versions of VMware and a few of the other things we've been doing are quite current. We have come across people running VMware Server and things like that, and a lot of different strange things that have caused issues. So once the server infrastructure reports are done, then you can move on to the application and services infrastructure, which is everything, and especially if it deals with the stacks a lot, and a lot of the stacks, the configuration involves IP addressing and so forth. That's where you have to look, and that's mostly affects the web, mail, and depends if you've got the different virus and filtering solutions and all those sort of things that go in with Exchange, GroupWise, and other things. DNS servers, bind Active Directory. We're finding that it's only in the last 6 months that anyone is rolling out 2008 significantly. So now that there are ports that we couldn't complete, or that the recommendations were upgraded to 2008 a year ago or a year and a half ago. Even though it was around, people still hadn't moved. So a lot of things like streaming, unicast, multicast video or other, all these things need to be V6'd, and VoIP down the bottom there, that's a particular one that we've been wondering about for a long time. I think I'm not much good with asterisks and things, and up until about, I think, 6 or 9 months ago, there was a fork that died, but I think now the next version does officially support it. Someone else with their expertise in that area. Now you've got to make your scripting. A lot of programmers are very lazy and embed IP addressing in their scripting and languages. We had one customer that wrote full training interfaces, and they hosted like online training for people like Microsoft and all conferences and everything. And they had thousands of embedded IP addresses in their code. And that cost them a lot of money in programmer time to go back and centralize that configuration and have it support V6. Thankfully, most of a lot of the code, PHP, Python, and a few of the others can inherit stuff, so they should be able to deal with the new V6 as it comes up. Operational support systems, that's quite difficult. That's a big aspect for ISPs, especially when you're trying to radius and do accounting and billing, NetFlow and V6. This is all brand new. Is there many people doing NetFlow with V6 here? Yeah, so this is one of the things you've got to start thinking about. We're about to run out of IP addresses in about 3 weeks from IANA, and then X number of months after that. Mr. Houston, I'm sure, can give us a more specific date based on the maths, and then we'll have to actually start making it happen. So the people that in New Zealand specifically that want to get into these areas and like hammer them down, they should start either getting together in their specific technology focuses where they're good at, maybe even putting a team of people that can do this sort of thing and help ISPs and so forth, rather than just trying to do it all in-house. Okay, one of the peripheral ones, but actually is really important, Office and DC supporting infrastructure, all this sort of equipment. From your handsets, thankfully the old Cisco 7940s and 60s, one of the recent SIP upgrades for that supports IPv6 addressing, which was great. All the desktops, hardwares and smartphones, that looks like there are a few of the carriers that are starting to mandate IPv6 on their handsets, but it's still going to take a long time. Network printers, network photocopiers. I've got a 6-year-old Canon, I think. It's actually got IPv6 in the actual configuration. Someone was thinking ahead at some point. But a lot of it hasn't. We can do a lot of barcode scanning, the UPSs for management, GPS projectors, etc. Infrastructure, one of the things we've been playing with lately is building management systems, which is cooling, heating, smart meters, the circulatory system of a building with water, air, elevators, emergency systems, control systems, security, all that sort of stuff. Smart metering is it's a big thing in Australia. A lot of telcos have sort of GSM or mobile cell built into their things with a little antenna to get out of the basement. And trying to have that interacting with the current networks is a challenge. I know the NBN is seriously considering and negotiating with the sort of the electrical companies, gas and water, to try and figure out how they can use the NBN and if they can transmit the data over that. Firewalls, obviously they've got to be upgraded. The routers and so forth, most of the current things today need to be junked unless it's Cisco. There's not too much that can be upgraded, especially if they're not designed for the firmware and so forth. Massive amount of people travelling with remote access tokens, all those different things. Everything needs to be upgraded. That's more important. There's a lot of things you can get away with just leaving on V4 or whatever will be the resulting implementation of NAT-PT, where you have a V6 and a V4 network in your same company, and you can go through a NAT gateway to get to your old little V4 photocopier and things like that. Whatever that results as, because I believe NAT-PT has been killed off or something. So I'm sure there'll be replacements of that kind of implementations. But there's a lot of things in the office you can come up with ways to get around, but when you're out and about, travelling around, you've got to make sure that your Cisco VPN client and all the different implementations, whether they be Juniper, NetScreens, and everything else like that, they've all got to be upgraded if you're suddenly in a country where you're in a hotel where you're getting a V6 address and so forth, because that's going to be a primary path if your operating system supports it. Wireless management, the access controllers, DHCP is going to be interesting. The SME grade switching management, the Netgear, the D-Link, the junk out there, fleet management systems, vehicles. Some people use different management systems to keep track of their vehicles and so forth. So they're the key reports, apart from the targeted reports. We've participated in most of these, mostly the networking though, and assisting other people that have the areas of expertise. We work with a few integrators that are VMware specialists or Citrix specialists, and we'll spend time training them on what the things they need to look for. Pretty much it doesn't matter what platform it is, you're going to have to still look for the same things. So this is what the customer, whether it be you internally or something you're doing for people, should be looking for. A true representation of the current situation. You've probably got a liability if you say, oh no, you don't have to do anything, everything's good, and you spend $5 and you'll be V6 capable, and then they find out later when everything goes to hell. So the true representation is really important. What needs to be done to bring them up to capabilities, whether it be hardware, software, licensing and so forth. They need to know their costs. Some of that can cost a lot of money. For some reason, in some of the platforms we work with, V6 static might be in the base license, but dynamic and OSPF V6 might be in the advanced license. There are a couple of challenging things. That can actually, if you've got a lot of devices, that can cost a lot of money. So what options exist for the above issue? So you tell them what the issues are, and then you try to research it, whether it be new hardware, new modules, or all those sort of things. If it's something that already has got fully V6 capable, then the minimal details are required, and you should be able to move forward quite easily. You should feel you know all that you need to go forward. Because if you just tell them what they've got to do, but not telling them how much it's going to cost to implement an entire routing infrastructure and things like that, then, or how much time it's going to take, whether internally or not, it can be a big surprise. And the report either should have a technical and a layman's explanation, because they often will just throw it at management, and if it's not good enough, management won't even read it, and so forth. So our experiences, what goes well? The initial enthusiasm is great. It's not hard to sell. It's hard to get information out of people, and the initial enthusiasm is great. Common vendors are generally very easy to audit. Even the vendors that actually don't have much to do with V6 or haven't got their implementations fully rolled out, they're still normally easy to deal with if they're the big vendors. Customer has an opportunity to fix pre-existing problems. We've often looked at the network and there's bad summarization, poor routing design, a whole bunch of things like that, which we can actually say as sort of a sub-recommendations. If you fix that, tidy up this, that, A, B, C, D, E, then it'll actually make your life a lot easier when you do go to migrate. What doesn't go well? Okay, V6 has still got some issues. There are still debates on how things, some things should be done. We've seen the debates in the list lately about point-to-point links. How should we number them? 127s, 112s, 64s. You know, there's the ping-pong effects. There's all these different things. People that haven't implemented fully RFC 4333, and there's, I believe, a new one recommendation which Randy Bush and a few others released in December, I think, which looks interesting. So there's still a few things that you go, okay, how are we going to go forward? And not all the solutions are commonly available. CGN, LSN, that is still only, as far as I know, Cisco, only Phil's here or some Cisco people, I don't know what the state since last year is, but it doesn't seem to have changed much in the CGN, LSN space, where you've got modules for GSRs and a few of the big routers, but if you're dealing around the 7200 range and the ASRs and a few of the other areas, then there's not much option still available. Now what I say is not commonly available. the Chinese, if you saw the Beijing presentations, they've been doing CGN and LSN for a while now, for tens, if not hundreds of millions of users in certain aspects, using a lot of equipment that's commonly available there by Huawei or H3C and other areas. It's just that really hasn't filtered out to the vendors that are the big common vendors that we use yet. And as far as I know, there's no Cisco or Juniper main box, which is this is your CGN box specifically designed for it. I think actually the design isn't even finalised on how many ports, how does it work, how should you scale it, and those sort of areas. ISC released a little CGN open source implementation, but we haven't actually had a chance to test that. One of the things that doesn't go very well is engineers get nervous about security concerns, which links to the next one. Scrutiny by third parties. We're a proud bunch of people, engineers, and when external people come in and start poking around your network and criticising it, which is the whole point of the report, we've found some engineers extremely difficult to the point of refusing to give us information whether their bosses have told them to or not. We're not letting them to those routers, but we need to know. And they're, well, we'll tell you how. Well, tell us how. We don't know how to tell you how. And so forth. So sometimes in Asia there's some big proudness or pride problems and things like that. Getting the details needed. We've got one customer specifically that comes to mind that's taken 11 months just to get the full configs out of them. And it took like 5 different redacted visions of their configs. They're like, here's the configs, and all the IPs are redacted. And we're like, we don't even know what your routing protocols and your summarization looks like because you redacted it, and then you ask for another version, and they'd give you a little bit more, and another version, and they'd give you a little bit more until I think it was 10 months later that we went, okay, we've got enough. We're sick of this. We've got enough to go forward and guess some of it. Language barriers, as I've said before, when working with foreign entities, that can be troublesome. Uncommon vendors and legacy. As I said before, I think there's so many bits and pieces that we've come across that we just don't even know. In fact, one of the problems has been, not only have we not known it, we might have been able to find something out about it, but trying to get a password out of them. You go, okay, well, how do we log into this thing to see what its interface and configuration? And even sometimes they look at you blankly and going, oh, no one's logged into this for 6 years. And then you try and figure out how to do a password recovery on it. Especially if there's password recovery protection and you lose the config, then they're not going to risk it. So there might be a key device sitting in the network that you have to actually fully re-engineer from scratch what its functionality is, and then maybe require several swap outs to be able to get past it. Foreign vendors. One of the other issues is that we've come across is the interfaces on some of these devices might be only Chinese or only Japanese. That's been a bit of a challenge. And you actually have to bring in some translation specialists to actually assist you with those. Because we tried a normal translator at first, what are these words? And they couldn't translate what subnet meant. They didn't even know what these things were. So you actually have to find someone that's technical knowledge with the CCNA or something at least before they can even start translating for you. And then you've got to start finding that in the different languages that you're dealing in. And that becomes a challenge. The wrong assumptions is that this will solve everything. We will do this, it'll be fine. That is an assumption that you have to kill off from these guys at the start. Because they just think, oh, okay, it's only $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, whatever you want to do. And they'll go, so we'll know what to do? And you're like, hopefully, is the best thing that we often say. We will give you the better picture than you had before, but in nearly every report we've done so far, they've found hardware that they'd forgotten about and things that they hadn't told us about and so forth. And, or someone didn't want us playing with it. We've actually had equipment, its own existence was concealed by people. Oh, we don't want them playing with that, even though it was a critically important device. Explaining that that will also, they'll need to invest in training, new equipment coming out. People are still buying equipment that is not V6 compliant today. So 90% of our clients actually let us finish the report. Some can get quite difficult during the process, can get a bit heated and so forth, especially with what you're asking. It's almost like doing a psych testing on them. They get nervous about having been completely investigated. Now, this might seem a reasonable response from an external third party. But we've assisted people that are internal IT departments doing this in their own larger organisations, and they've gotten the same things from different departments. We look after Hoyts, for example, and they get a lot of the digital team versus the IT team versus the media streaming team. They just like to keep their things to themselves, and they don't like to tell even their own staff members what's going on. And which is, I find a challenge, because when you need to find a CTO or someone like that with a mandate that can just tell everybody, cooperate. So of the 60 reports that get past phase one, actually get into that, most of them, most clients are so disheartened at the cost of the effort, some of them just give up. Most re-establish contact later on, especially when there's a news article. Vint surfs in the news, I take blame, and suddenly it's the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. Every time something like that happens, our phone calls or emails go up about these things. A lot of them that move on to phase two, only 55% complete phase two in a reasonable time frame, less than 6 to 9 months, due to other priorities, budget retargets, management changes. Management changes, really bad. You finally get someone and you spend a lot of effort explaining to him to be the champion of your cause, and a new guy comes in who has a relationship with different people, who has different ideas, who thinks that IPv4 will last forever. IPv6 is not necessarily mandatory. Clients are still buying transit from connectivity because of relationships and not demanding that they be dual stacked. A lot of people are interested, but some don't think they need to worry about it. They go, oh, we'll worry about it later. But the attitude is changing, as I just said about the recent news. There's a lot of articles, and that is creating a lot of hype around the world at the moment. And I see that in 1 month from now, when IANA actually does run out, and that's on every newspaper in the world, things are going to start to go crazy. People are going to start to think, it's going to seem like it's the IP apocalypse, or apocalypse. And although we've got a long period of time for the RIRs run out, that will be front page. The internet is now out. It'll be a front page thing. And this is where our role, our job and our communities all finally ends up on the front page. Our advice, get your message out there ASAP. IPv6 is here now and happening, whether they like it or not. Do a report soon, whether you're using internal or whether you're a corporate. So if you're like Telecom New Zealand or Geni or all these other big corporates, you need to start gathering internal meetings, and the telcos probably have it, but a lot of the other big corporates don't, like insurance companies and banks and so forth. Involve management. The sooner you do, because we've actually had dozens of meetings where people have pulled out of IT budgets money for consulting, and then you go to do it and then the management just goes, how much, what, who? And cancels the whole thing. Maybe to reenact it later after there's a bit more work. The timeframes from budgets can be hard. You can read the example there. Enterprises need to accept that their architecture will change. Be specific with the vendors about what you're requiring. Consider alternate vendors. Everyone, you need to say that to you, whether internally or externally, or to a customer. They need to consider that from day one, because some of their vendors are not going to be ready for a year or two, or their equipment may never be ready, depending on what it is. They need to budget for money and time. So the last bit, if you don't do a report now, they should at least be playing with V6 in some capacity, that engineers or the technical people. Do you want to be on the train or under it? We say to often people. An IPv6 management committee involving management, engineering, sales and R&D has helped in some companies. In Hoyts we managed to get people from different teams together, and that worked. They actually haven't done much about it, but I'm happy that even if a company's had a meeting and got some reports and knows that when it becomes to the critical time, they've got something to refer to, or they know at least what their vulnerabilities are and where that may be. Hoyts, for example, are about to go into different projects of content distribution, and because of that's going to run over their existing network, the V6 will pop up again. Okay, so what are we using? What multicasting technology? Is it V6 compliant? And now it's actually been great, because even though they don't buy everything off us, they've been hassling their other vendors. Is it V6 compliant? Is it V6 compliant? I've been seeing these questions in emails, and that's all we need. That's one of the things we want to make happen. That people are thinking about it when they're purchasing. There are companies, governments in this world, that to become I presume New Zealand's the same, where you become a preferred supplier, that everything you must supply must be V6 capable. I think the US government has a lot of projects involving that. The last thing, different ways of conducting reports. Do it for them, which we do mostly. Do it with them, coaching teams, getting a committee together, chairing those meetings, shepherding them in the right directions and everything. And which is a little different to, including engineering capacity and investigations yourself, or just stand there as a purely consulting manner and advising them using these sort of models of things they need to look at and consider and saying, yep, now start looking at this, now start looking at this. This is who you can call at your vendors, or this is how to ask, how to talk to your vendors is actually a very important thing. The right people and so forth. Yeah, and that's it. Questions? No questions.
Stunned silence.
Stunned silence.
Thank you.